here tonight to share about my experiences as well as hear from our amazing panelists and get to share some information with you guys as well. I'll pass it back to Tal to share a little bit about himself, and then we'll get into it.
That sounds good. Again, I'm Tal. I am the Assistant Director of Lead Generation, and so I focus a lot with our partnerships and our events. If you can tell from the former energy, I used to be a kindergarten, first grade, and second grade play teacher. I had a classroom filled with toys, games, and stations. Students thought I lived at the school and made toys for a living, so I had that pretty good rumor going about myself. But to just get us to know us a little bit more, I'm actually going to have Andrea speak about her experience and what led her to City Teaching Alliance.
Awesome. Thank you, Tal. So just to share a little bit more about me, I put it in the chat, but I am calling in from Dallas, Texas. This is where I was raised since about the age of 6. I was originally born in Mexico, but again, raised here in Dallas. This is where I went to school all the way up to university level as well. In my career, I have about 6 years of experience in the nonprofit and education sector. So formerly working with several different nonprofits locally that provided services for families, but also academic supports for students. And in my former role, I was advocating for quality out of school time programming for students. So this includes summer programming and after school programming, and really being able to now transition to advocating for quality education in classrooms for students at City Teaching Alliance has been a very seamless transition. For me, in the public education system, I did navigate that early as an English learner without much guidance. And so being able to have that experience of having a positive impact from my 6th grade teacher, which I put in the chat, and really being able to experience a committed and caring educator and the impact that can have on a student's life is one of the reasons I'm really passionate about education and about representation as well. So I'm really excited to be here again, and I'll pass it back to Tal to share a little bit more about himself, and then we'll dive into introducing our speakers.
Again, I'm Tal. I don't usually have my hair in a bun, but sometimes I do. I think it looks pretty good when I have the bow in. I am a former kindergarten, first and second grade play teacher. I was a 5th grade writing teacher, and so that took some convincing. The students were like, don't you play with toys? Why are you teaching us writing? But I was like, I actually went to college for this. So this is like what I'm really excited about. And then I was also the assistant rugby coach of the high school down the street. I've been actively working to address educational inequity since 2014. So approaching near a decade in this industry, in this career, which is wild. I don't feel that old, but there it is. And also about me, I'm a first-generation American. I'm a first-generation college student and graduate as well. And so one of the things I love about City Teaching Alliance is the emphasis on being able to see yourself in your educators and the leaders around you. And then also, I went into the classroom through a different program, y'all. I had 6 weeks of training before I had 200 students. That would never happen with City Teaching Alliance. And I'm grateful I was able to work with kids, but I also think about what more could I have done for students in my classroom had I had a year to be prepared as a resident teacher before going into that experience. And so with that being said, I am thrilled to introduce some of our featured speakers today. I'm actually going to have them come off mute. Anthony, if you wouldn't mind starting to say your name, your role, where you're coming from, and what brought you to City Teaching Alliance.
Yeah, sure thing. Hey, everybody. My name is Anthony Hernandez. I am the executive director for City Teaching Alliance in Dallas. What brought me to City Teaching Alliance? 7 years ago, 7.5 years ago now, I was transitioning out of the classroom only because I did not go through a program like City Teaching Alliance, a residency program. And I had been a teacher for a few years, and I'll be honest, I was being given a lot of thumbs up and praise for like, hey, like you're doing a really great job. And meanwhile, I was like, I am absolutely not doing a good job. Like I know that there are students and different learners in my classroom who are not getting the results that they need. And I wanted to make sure that I went into a career field where teachers felt like they were supported, they had the skills necessary. Basically, I wanted them to avoid making my mistakes. So 7.5 years ago, I started as a recruiting and onboarding specialist for then Urban Teachers, now City Teaching Alliance, and have been working at this site ever since. I've seen this organization grow, change, adjust, and we continue to get better. And it's candidly, it's the thing that keeps me coming back every day, is even when I know we aren't perfect and we're going to make missteps, we continue to get better, and we do it for our teachers and we do it for our students. So that's a little bit about me and what brought me here.
Hi, good night, everyone. I am so grateful to be here. My name is Jay Mancini. I am a resident teacher. I am in my first year with City Teaching Alliance. I am stationed in Philadelphia, and I'm also a Philadelphia native. I am currently teaching 7th grade ELA. And what brought me to City Teaching Alliance is a recently discovered passion for disrupting educational inequity that I only realized when I left my high school, which I was blessed to go to a high school in a very affluent and predominantly white area, only after coming out of the Philadelphia school system and realizing that the quality of education in a school across the street that's in a different county with a different population and a different set of educators with a different set of motivations and supports, really heavy on the supports, the quality of education that students can have in between those two schools. And it really broke my heart realizing that someone close to me and dear to me who was brought up in the same way that I was, in the same neighborhood, didn't have the opportunity to go to the same school that I did, and their life path was completely changed just because of the lack of support. And that really resonated with me to be able to work with City Teaching Alliance when they came and visited my undergrad school and said, hey, this is what we are all about. We are all about bridging that gap and putting teachers with the right tools, with the right supports, and with the right motivations in places that they are needed. So yeah, that's what brought me to City Teaching Alliance.
Hello, everyone. My name is Karina Delgado, and I was born and raised in El Paso, Texas. I am currently in Dallas, Texas, and I am a resident this year. For those of you who don't know, El Paso is a border city, meaning that the Mexican border is just literally walking distance. I think it's really important to state, like, my high school demographics were 99% Hispanic and 1% white. Where I went to university, which was University of Texas at El Paso, that was 83% Hispanic, 5% white, 2% Black or African American, and 0.90% Asian. So just looking at those demographics, it really showed me that I was not 100% equipped to be in the classroom, especially during the times that we're living in right now. And I started to panic, and I just was thinking about a career change, a degree change. And that's actually when I ran into City Teaching Alliance, which was Urban Teachers. The first thing I read about City Teaching Alliance was how they acknowledge teacher burnout and they came with a solution. Any other teacher program doesn't acknowledge that teachers are burning out and quitting the profession. And City Teaching Alliance was not afraid to say that this is a thing, but I have a solution for you. So just that itself was like really, really intriguing. And then the fact that they offer transformative social emotional learning, that is something that no one talks about, no program talks about, like not even schools talk about it. So when I heard that, that's just like something that students need right now. And with all of that, I was just very intrigued by the perks that this program had, like all of the ones that I just mentioned. And most of all, I just refilled my passion to teach. And that's why I decided to do City Teaching Alliance, just to better myself as an education for all students.
Thank you so much to our speakers for introducing themselves and sharing a little bit more about their why to now being at City Teaching Alliance. We're going to hear from them a little bit later, but first we wanted to dive into some data pieces and really kind of lay out the foundation of the importance and the need of having Latinx representation in the classroom, as well as, just sharing our experiences, which are like my own experiences are definitely not unique to me. I know that they are shared across the board for many different folks in very similar ways. But diving into, understanding the need, as I mentioned, I live here in Dallas. I grew up in Dallas, so this is personal for me. Really being able to, I recall like being able to feel represented in the classroom. My first experience with that was in sixth grade. I had my first Hispanic teacher who was kind of bilingual, and I say kind of because the Spanish wasn't super fluent, but it was the very first time that I felt seen in the classroom, that I felt understood in the classroom. Being an English learner, because of that, I think like that was a small way of a bridge being or a gap like being filled in, right? And then as well, like relating to my family, and also being comfortable like advocating for me or showing up to school events where they might not be able to really understand what was going on. It was one of the first times that my mom felt comfortable going to the school and speaking with my teacher and really being invested in my learning, and being able to understand the information that was being delivered to her. So again, like I mentioned, like this is something that is personal for me, and especially here in the DFW, we'll dive into the different information, the different data points, just to kind of share how it compares nationally. Latinx students make up about 27% of the K through 12 population nationwide. In cities like Dallas, they make up about 70% of enrolled students. So we take a look at this data point and then see what that reflects like in our teacher population. According to the National Center for Education, only 9% of K through 12 public school teachers identify as Hispanic. And so kind of really seeing there what that looks like nationally and recognizing that we are falling short of making sure that students are seeing themselves represented in the classroom. And then also considering, right, the impact and the effects of that.
And then diving deeper into some of the data, like what does this mean for learning? What does this mean potentially for repercussions and consequences? And so when we look at the research, 1 in 5 Latinx male students will be suspended before they enter high school. And we are very aware of how high school suspension rates lead to lower student outcomes, but most importantly, to significantly higher dropout rates. When we talk about the interconnectivity of educational inequity and how it really affects every other system and sector, it starts with stats like this. It starts in the classroom when you're not having teachers who are seeing students holistically, or who are approaching with culturally responsive teaching, or having maybe the identities of their students in that intersectionality approach to building an inclusive classroom. And so when we look even further, what does the research say? We actually wanted to look at a study, and luckily we saw from Dr. Matthew Sherrill, Travis J. Bristol, and Toloni Britton, they actually spent 10 years diving through the research. This study was really an effort to see what is the impact of having a Latinx educator working directly with Latinx students, and really also seeing how this would affect disciplinary actions. And Andrea is going to dive into the results of the outcomes of this research.
Thanks, Tal, for framing that for us. So 2 things were found. 1, representation matters. And 2, Latinx teachers benefit all students. So diving into the first point, or the first finding, the presence of Latinx teachers did correlate significantly with a reduced likelihood of suspension of Latinx students. And so kind of thinking back, had New York schools increase the recruitment efforts of Latinx educators and align them with their Latinx student population over that past decade, it is conceivable that we would have served a reduction of about 1,600 suspensions among Latinx students. And so given this, data and this specific study, it definitely does hold significance, right? Like thinking back over, that was 10 years and different student lives impacted. And especially given that Latinx students constituted 40% of all suspensions in New York City, again, during that 10-year time period. Also going into the second finding, which is that Latinx teachers benefit all students. The study did further indicate a decrease in suspension rates for Black students as well when they were paired with Latinx teachers. Additionally, according to a survey conducted from over 5,000 educators, Latinx teachers emerged as the group most inclined to express that they embarked on their teaching careers with the primary focus on the pursuit of social justice through education, which is, again, like one of the strong pillars of a program like ours, like at City Teaching Alliance. And remarkably, half of all Latinx educators articulated that their motivation for entering the profession was rooted in a desire to deliver a curriculum that validates the identities of students from diverse racial backgrounds. I also want to highlight too, like while the most substantial impact for Black students is observed that when they are matched with Black educators, it is also essential to acknowledge that educators from different diverse backgrounds do possess the capacity to employ, again, more culturally sensitive, culturally responsive, and nuanced teaching methods. So this in turn influences their decisions regarding the recommendation of suspension or alternative measures for students of color. And so really thinking holistically at the whole picture, right, of representation and how having teachers that represent students and really, again, like understand their identities and are also a big motivation for them being in the classroom is also social justice, how that can truly positively impact students' lives and their academic outcomes.
And going even deeper into this, what is the reality for Latinx students today? And so according to multiple studies, by 8th grade, the average math score for Latinx students is 24 points lower than their white peers, and the average reading score is 19 points lower. And so there are a lot of factors that are out of our control, but at City Teaching Alliance, being intentional about who we're recruiting and the need for bringing incredible representation into the classroom is paramount. Fixing this disparity in Latinx representation can do unimaginable good, not just for Latinx students, but for all students' personal, academic, and social emotional development. And so that's what brings us here today, is really making sure that we're bringing the leaders who are going to share the reflection and the identities of their students, because those teachers tend to go above and beyond for kids in their classroom. And so with that being said, I'm really excited for us to transition from the information to really hearing stories and experiences from some of our incredible panelists here. And so Andrea is going to go through our panel discussion before we go through a little bit of a Q&A. And so Andrea, whenever you're ready, you can go through our first question. Again, here are our featured speakers, and Andrea, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you. Super excited for these questions. And time permitting, we'll also have some time for, other questions that the audience may have. Feel free, but we'll go ahead and get us started with our first question. This is going to be directed for our teacher residents, Jay and Karina. So what has your experience been like as a Latinx educator with City Teaching Alliance? What supports or structures have you used or have been available to you where like we could improve or also be better? So would love to start out with Jay or Karina to answer this first question.
I can go ahead and start. My experience as a Latinx teacher, that's actually what made me seal the deal and sign the contract with City Teaching Alliance was for our experience weekend, we had a panel that had Latinx community members from Dallas in here. And it was just so powerful to see how they really wanted to give back to the students and how the students were number one in their eyes. So just seeing that just always brings me back to the mission of the students are the mission. And something else too is like we're starting the Latinx community here in City Teaching Alliance, and Anthony actually gave us the great opportunity to help choose the name of our alliance. And I'm really excited to see how it's going to flourish, because it really shows that they're listening to our voice and they're listening to our thoughts and concerns, and we're actually creating something here. So I'm really excited.
I will follow up on Karina's response. I think the biggest attention grabber to for City Teaching Alliance for me in terms of representing Latinx educators was the inclusiveness or the inclusivity of including Latinx students and educators within the urban community. Because when I was introduced to City Teaching Alliance, I was introduced as urban teachers. And it was a big emphasis on being within urban cities. And a lot of times that comes with the connotation of simply Black students or a Black population. And City Teaching Alliance really put in the effort to understand that no, you are not only serving Black students, you are serving Black and Brown students. And for me, that was really powerful because specifically as the Afro-Latina myself, it's easy to simply in a way that you present, whether it be demographics, physically, the number of students in the classroom, it's easy to just simplify as this is a Black community. But that's not the case for Philadelphia at all. It's not my case for my educational experience. Most of my elementary and pre-high school experiences, I was in a classroom with 50% Black, 50% Latinx. So it was very important to me that urban teachers understood that that was the reality of the schools and demographics that we were serving. And I felt that that need was really met and that attention was really drawn. So that was definitely one of the most impressive things that draw me towards City Teaching Alliance. As far as supports, I think that drawing that attention to the need for addressing your Brown students as well as your Black students, that also tied into your bilingual students or your students who do not speak English. That was really introduced to me at the beginning, even before I got placed on my clinical site in my summer sessions. You are going to be in a classroom where you have students who do not speak English. How are we going to navigate that? Having those conversations before you're even in front of the students is extremely important because you don't know what you're going to do if you don't speak Spanish, which I don't. But if you don't speak Spanish, what are you going to do? How are you going to navigate? What supports are you going to be able to provide your students, even if you don't speak Spanish? So having those conversations was really essential for me.
Thank you both so much for your response there. And Jay, I really resonated with that second half of your response. Again, as an English learner, had my teachers had the supports to know how to support me, I think my experience would have been a little bit different starting off. Again, thank you for your responses. Moving on to our second question, this is going to be for Anthony. How does the representation of Latinx teachers in urban education influence the academic and social experiences of Latinx students and other students?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think first, kudos to the two of you for coordinating leading with the research, right? It's like the research is there, the proof is in the pudding, and that's you named a couple of studies, but there are several, right? And you don't have to go and look far for what the influences are. In terms of how I think the academic and social experiences of Latinx students on other students is like, to Karina's point, we live in a diverse world, right? And I think one of the biggest failures of the American experience is when we create a segregated society where there are the haves and the have-nots, and the school at this on this side of town and the school on this side of town don't have the similar experiences. We're just taking away cultural enrichment from people, right? We're taking away what it's like to go to a friend's house and hear different languages spoken, to taste different dishes, to experience a culture, to watch different sports on TV. And when you lack that diversity of experiences, all we're doing is setting ourselves up for failure when in fact you come out into the workforce and you're going to be working with people across the globe, right? It's the same with our cohorts. Our cohorts are diverse, in just about any way that you can think of. Age, race, where you're from, what your lived experiences have been, what colleges and universities that you've gone to, and to not have the experience of working alongside or having a teacher who has that identity, right, is I think those are some of the largest disservices. Like Karina, she talked about being on a border town. The first year of my teaching experience was also in a border town in Donna, Texas. y'all can look it up, Donna, Texas. Google map it really quickly. There's no space between where Donna is and the Mexican border is. And I had students every day who were, who would come from Mexico to Texas to go to school. And the majority of my students were Spanish speakers. And I could tell that I can't imagine what their experience would have been like had they not have had educators who identified with them, shared their experiences, shared their language, shared their culture. It's just it could have been a really terrible situation, but luckily I worked in a pretty diverse school building. So I think, to boil it down simply, it's just about making sure that like part of an education in public school is working alongside diverse folks, and learning that the world is a very big place with a very it does not look like what your neighborhood might have looked like growing up. So
Any thoughts that Jay or Karina would like to add to the second question before we move on?
I would actually love to add to this, just because Latinx teachers can really make the difference in urban education. At the school that I'm currently doing my residency in, the demographics of teachers are 23% Hispanic, when half of those teachers, they're Spanish teachers, with a student demographic of 100% Hispanic, 100%, and only 23% of those teachers are Hispanic or speak Spanish, which is again the Hispanic teachers. And how can a student just really feel at home when they don't have representation in the classroom? We aim for students to come as their authentic, true self in the classroom. But yet, if they don't have somebody who they can relate to, they don't have somebody that they can talk about their quinceañera with and actually know what they're talking about, or having to work with their family, taking care of their siblings, having to know that struggle or have been through that struggle, they will never come into the class their full authentic self. Also, students don't have that, they don't have representation in the classroom. They don't know how to speak up for themselves. We're talking K through 12, where they're just so embarrassed to even speak out loud with fearing of being wrong. So that is why it's like so important that we have Latinx teachers in the classroom. A lot of our students, they get left behind because their teachers don't know how to help them, they don't know how to engage them, and they don't know how to challenge them. Students don't know, they have no idea sometimes what's going on in the classrooms. At a 10th grade level, we do have like level 1 ELLs in our classroom. And it's just like really tough to see that, because the first week of school, I was able to spot who was an ELL, who needed help, and who just didn't want to talk because they were afraid. And to me, that's just like the biggest thing of, they're not going to enjoy their experience because they can't be social because they don't feel at home. So having a teacher in there who can represent them and who can speak for them, who can translate for them, that makes all the difference. And not just with students, but with parents too. I actually had the privilege to be invited to a parent teacher conference just this last 2 weeks ago, and I was placed as the translator for my 10th grade level. And you would not believe the relief that the parents had knowing that somebody spoke Spanish. Of course, there are plenty of resources out there as translators, but having that one-on-one connection just makes the whole difference, to where parents can now be honest about their common concerns and even their praises. So it's really important that we're getting those Latinx teachers in the classrooms to serve our students.
Okay, if there are no other thoughts there, I'm going to go ahead and move us along to our third question. So this question is, in what ways can Latinx educators serve as advocates for equitable education policies and practices in urban schools? So anyone can feel free to hop off mute for this one, and share a little bit more about their experience.
I just want to echo what Anthony and Karina have said, especially about being able to identify with your students. I think that it's extremely important to understand just the sheer power and influence that being able to identify with someone has. when you are able to identify with someone on a cultural level, on a social knowledge level, on an emotional level, you become tied to them in a certain way. And that's exactly what I'm experiencing with my students right now. And when you are able to identify with your students, I find that as an educator, it pushes you, whether intentionally or unintentionally, to pay a closer eye to the way that they are able to navigate their educational experience. For me, just in the little bit of time that I've been at my clinical site, which is about 2 months now, I find myself paying a much closer attention to my Afro-Latino students, to my Latinx students, because of the challenges that I see when they are outside of my classroom, where they don't have any representation and they don't have anyone to identify with and make them a concern in their day. And I understand that it's extremely difficult as an educator. We are in classrooms with 35 students. We are in classrooms where maybe 3 out of 35 of those students do not speak English. And you don't have the tools, you don't have the supports, and yeah, you don't have the supports to navigate that in a certain way. However, when you are able to identify with your students and your students are able to identify with with yourself, like I said before, it pushes you to pay a closer eye. And for me, I have a student who has been passed through the educational system in a way that would break your heart. He's been neglected. Some days he'll come into the school and he'll say good morning and people will just walk straight past him simply because he's not saying good morning in English. And seeing these interactions that they have and the way that they are disturbed in their other classrooms, it really it forces me to take a step forward and place myself on their educational journey. I have to make myself the person that's going to intervene and speak up on their behalf because no one else is going to do it. And when you have that identification and concern with that student, you can see three things through to the end. Whereas unfortunately in our system, so many kids just get lost, and the supports that they apply for, that they push for, that their parents push for, they just get lost. But I find myself being motivated, especially just to see that they are getting served and they are getting the supports that they need.
I think to this point about, serving as an advocate for equitable education policies and practice in urban schools, the very first thing that you have to do, and I can't stress this and emphasize this enough, is be a good teacher. And I'm talking about truly highly effective, well-equipped educator, someone who can get results for all students, right? And like that has got to be step one, and that's priority one, because there's nothing more equitable than making sure that every student gets a high quality education. In order to do that, you need to seek training. You need to seek additional resources. You have to be someone who's in a constant learning mode, which I really appreciate about so many of the teachers in our program. So it's about learning. And then learning is wonderful when you have it for yourself. But the great thing is you're learning to be a teacher. So you need to teach other people what to do with that information. For example, everyone in our program in Dallas, it's a requirement of our program. You're going to earn an English as a second language supplemental certificate. We are going to give you that training. You're going to get additional resources, study materials for not only for passing the exams. That's like a tertiary thing. That's another thing that happens. What's most important to us is that you have the skills necessary for leading instruction for students whose first language may not be English. Not only because they deserve it, but because that's just good teaching practice. And if you have those skills and you see others who are struggling, or you see other teachers on the campus who aren't differentiating that instruction or leading in that way, or coming at it with the lens, it's not about leading some crazy revolution. It's literally about asking the question, hey, may I ask, how is this being differentiated for ELLs? Boom. You've just sparked an entire debate in a PLC of like, oh, I guess I haven't thought about that. Or like, hey, like, where's the ELPs? Like where are these things that you need to be adding into your lesson plan so that all students are getting that equitable treatment? But the very first thing you have to do is you have to get the knowledge on your own. Where I told you all I left teaching after a short while. That was something that I didn't know how to do then, and it's something that I make sure that all teachers know how to do now, is you know, you may not always have someone who's going to be the mentor or be a guide. You're going to have to seek it on your own. So luckily, City Teaching Alliance provides a lot of that training. But there are going to be times where even I will be like, hey, look, we don't really know the resource for that. Let's go and find it for you. And then it's about practicing what you know and actually leading by example. You know, the funny thing about leading for all students is people start to notice. And when you get results for kids, people are going to start to ask you questions, which is why I say the most impactful thing that you can do is be great at your job, be a great classroom teacher who gets student outcomes, student results, builds quality student relationships, because people are going to start to want to know, why do they keep coming to Mr. Hernandez's room? Why do students hang out in your room after class? Hey, why are your test results so much better than everybody else's? Hey, how did you get, you know, this student to achieve this thing in school? Answer, I became an effective educator, right? So I really think that that's what it all hinges on.
Did we have any other thoughts for question number 3 before we move on to question number 4? Awesome. All right. And Anthony, if you can actually kick us off with question number 4, which is what recommendations do you have for educational institutions, policymakers, and community organizations to increase the representation of Latinx teachers in urban education?
Yeah, I think the first thing that you have to do is listen, right? So it's about you know, it's just good design thinking is listen to the community. If this isn't where Latino graduates are going, you know, they're not going into fields in education, it's time to ask them why. It's time to find out why that, you know, what would make this a more attractive profession? What misconceptions do you have about the profession? What are you scared about? What are you nervous about? What would make, you know, how do we make this a more tenable profession for you and in the communities that you serve, right? A one size fits all approach is not going to work. This needs to be localized support systems for, hey, what is going to influence, because you know what works for Latinos in Dallas may be very different than Latinos in El Paso, than in the Valley, than in Philadelphia, than in Los Angeles, right? I think the other thing for community organizations is to show teachers that they are cared for and appreciated. Schools are only going to do so much, right? And I think, you know, Stephanie, this is a little bit speaking to your question in the chat. Reaching out to ally organizations and saying like, hey, like, you know, what chapters of local organizations can we work with to say, hey, you this is important, you matter here, and we want to make sure that you have the skills to support all of our teachers. I won't, we can speak to some of the partnerships that we've developed here in Dallas that have done that, but I think that's a really important. And then for policymakers, you know, put your money where your mouth is. You want to diversify the education field? Great. How are you going to make it more affordable? How are you going to remove barriers for teachers of color, like changing exam requirements for entering the teaching profession? How are we going to make it, and how are we also going to raise the bar, right? So there's so much that goes into becoming a teacher that I think people might miss, but I do think that it's important for us to just continue to bang the drum that this is important and we have to show people why, right? So those are a few of my ideas.
I think to piggyback off of what like Anthony's saying, students wake up at 5 a.m. The ones who are in Mexico wake up at 5 a.m. to get on the bus, to get to school, plus have to wait. They don't get home until 7 p.m. from all of that ride. It's just really making them get out there and see what's going on. The data is still so old that it's not reflecting all of the students that are incoming students, incoming ELLs. And honestly, so proud of the Latinx community because in education wise, we're breaking barriers. 18 and over, people who are actually graduating from college, we're breaking barriers. And where are we in the education field and why are we not there? So I just think it's really getting into the communities and showcasing the talent that we have. Being bilingual is a blessing also. So it's like, what can we do with those talents and how can they showcase our talents to show that we belong in the education field to help people? And policymakers, they probably won't get out there, but when people make noise, they'll start to listen. And I just think that we just have to also be more proud. Like, it took me 18, it actually took me like 21 years to be proud of being Latinx, of putting ella in my pronouns. And it's like, we got to make ourselves more known and more louder in doing great works, like Anthony mentioned.
I just want to echo Karina's point about showcasing the immense talent within the Latinx community. The main thing that drew me to City Teaching Alliance was the attention on Black and Brown students, Latinx community, serving the Latinx community. So I think that it's just very important that we understand that we have the data. It's right there in front of us to understand that there is an issue of Latinx students being pushed through the system and ignored and facing barriers that are not being disrupted. And we have the data that shows that Latinx educators are the ones disrupting this data and these harmful trends. So calling the attention to our ability to make these transformations in the quality of education is extremely important. I also just cannot stress enough support, support, support. It is sometimes seeming to be an impossible job that we have, especially the challenges that we face, and the pushback from simple, well, what should be simple suggestions on, hey, maybe this kid can get into an ELL class in the morning, or this kid can get into a learning support class to supplement the ELL class. And these things are just not being met because of the sheer ignorance towards the community. So definitely support and celebrating and drawing attention to the changes that can be made when we have representation.
Thank y'all. Well, we are at our last question. I'll start us off with Anthony again before we move into our Q&A. So for this last question, can you share examples of successful collaboration between Latinx teachers, students, families, and community, and the broader community in improving educational outcomes and fostering a sense of belonging in urban schools?
Yeah, I think I appreciate this question because it reminds us all of a very important thing, and that is that teachers, students, families, and the community are all responsible for improving educational outcomes, and these are assets in urban schools. So often when we talk about urban education, we act as if these things are absent. You couldn't be further from the truth, right? And Karina can speak to this. I'm sure Jay can speak to this. We often have families who care so much about the educational outcomes of their students, but they just don't know how to navigate it. So in ways that we see this kind of work together and people, like I've seen this work for the greater good, is when we have things like parent universities at schools in Dallas ISD and in Fort Worth ISD, where principals and campuses see a need, and then they bring the parents in to learn not only about the school system, but to give them tools and resources to help advocate for their students effectively, right? Whether in Spanish or in English, right? Teach them who the allies are on the campus. Hey, who do you need to be connected with? How do we make this more accessible to you? I think if you would be hard pressed to find an office in a Dallas ISD campus who doesn't hire a bilingual office aide or like office manager, because they want to make sure when a parent walks into the building, how off-putting is it if you walk into a place and you don't speak the language? It's scary. You don't want to go there, and you question your ability to do anything of value in that situation. And sometimes, so I think it's about, those are some of the ways that we do it, but it's a coordinated effort across all of these things of like, hey, the community has a need. This is where the people are. So how does the school get connected to it? I think we've seen this now with, I think the parent universities are probably some of the best examples that I can think of for it. And then I think a lot of it too is about showcasing like that this matters, right? More and more you're noticing that school boards are asking for grow your own programs, right? They want talent that is within the school district to become the teachers within that school district. Gee, I wonder why. Maybe it's because they have shared identity qualifiers, right? And they're making the teaching profession more affordable, they're making it more accessible, and they're making sure that people from the community can go then teach in the community. So you're seeing this with programs, I think, like City Teaching Alliance. You're seeing this with programs like Dallas College, which is a community college in Dallas that works closely with the district. to make sure that students and families are at the forefront of creating that sense of belonging, right? So those are a few ideas.
I think also too, always thinking about our parents when it comes to events we're having. Our students, they are an open book. They're always talking about things they're doing at home, things that they're creating, treats, like they talk about everything. And I think it's just involving the parents in that. When you're having a fall fest outside, speak to those children who cook with their parents, who sell food on the side, invite them into the community, because not only is it the sense of belonging of, hey, you remembered that me and my mom did this together, but it's also the sense of belonging of like, you want my mom to come here and sell with you. And it's just like, we have to show that we are listening, and we have to show that we care about not just the student, but the parent as well. And we want to have those communities. And of course, leadership, we just have to really be also implementing those things. If we're not seeing it happen, let's make it happen. If we're not seeing any type of Hispanic Fall Fest, like for Hispanic Heritage Month, let's plan it and let's make it, and let's break through the barriers of, no, we need this. And I'm sure you'll have more than 10 students on your side because they want to see it too. And I just think that we just have to create the collaboration if it's not happening.
I want to again echo what Karina said. So many gems in there about representation and being able to celebrate and invite our Latinx community members into the school and into their child's education. For me personally, I think that the most success that I've had in creating a sense of community with my students and their families is just simply involving their parents in their educational journey, being able to use tools like Class Dojo and whatever communication tool that your school uses to, post whatever homework that they have in Spanish, so that the parent understands this is what my child is doing right now. This is what they learned today. And in a way that's accessible to them. And also, like Karina said, having events that celebrate our culture. Indeed, like today, we literally just had our celebration for Hispanic Heritage Month, and it was like a setup in the gym about each class did a research or a poster on a Latin country, and we have students who did their project on Venezuela, Colombia, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and their families are from these places, and they got to go down and give a presentation on their country, share their favorite food, share anecdotes about their family, share experiences in their home countries and everything. And it was a way to connect them back to their culture in a way that they sometimes are not being served in the school. And it was extremely important to them. And it was, they had like the biggest smiles on their faces. It was amazing to see. And we actually had a couple parents come in, bring food, be able to, sing songs, and they had a bachata lesson. Like it was amazing. And it was just so much fun to see, students who are so ignored the minute that they walk in the door have a sense of importance in the school.
To our panelists, just a sincere thank you for diving into our questions for discussion today. I want to make sure that we open this up full group, and I actually would love to start with a question that was already asked in the chat. Stephanie, you can feel free to come off mute to bring more clarity to it, but I just want to say from what Stephanie wrote was that representation is important, but schools actually need to be educated in how to include Latinx teachers. For example, I work in a predominant Caucasian population and I don't feel included. What can schools do to do this? And so Anthony, Karina, Jay, I'd love just, whoever wants to get us started, would love someone to dive into that a little bit more.
I was just gonna touch base on what Anthony had said earlier in the chat. Basically, like, put your face in the place, and like your talent will make noise. So we have students coming into our classroom because we just have a safe environment, music playing, Spanish music, I should say, playing. And it's like teachers want to know why students are coming into the classroom. Teachers want to know how come in PLC meetings I have nothing bad to say about my students because they do great work, but other people do. It's like stand up for your students and also stand up for yourself. Like, hey, you know what? I have this plan it. I have this out. I think this would be a great idea. I can help. I can give you ideas. And believe me, there will be at least one person in there who's like, wait, she's right. Wait, that's a great idea. And that's how we form these communities and like we form these partnerships is by just making noise, I feel. That's a great question.
What I'll add is have empathy with your school leader, right? So I'm the executive director of our site. I don't know about everything that's going on. I don't know every experience. I don't know every, I don't know the results to every survey. I don't, I try my best to keep my thumb on the pulse, but the fact is, if I feel that way, I know for a fact the school leader feels that way. So my guess is you're not being made to. Nobody wants you to feel that way, especially a school leader. If you are competent, qualified, excited educator, the last thing they want to do is to make you feel like you don't belong on that campus. If you approach that with your leadership, and I know it can be a tough thing to speak truth to power, but I think it's important that you say, hey, like, I think that we could be doing more to create a more inclusive environment. And approach with solutions. What are some ideas that you would recommend? And if you don't know those solutions, say, hey, I'd like to put together a committee, and no leadership worth their salt is going to say, yeah, we don't have time for that. That can't be a priority right now, because inclusive environments for adults makes more inclusive environments for students, which makes sure that you have better results for students, for teachers. Everybody wins in that situation. There's no downside to that. So I think it's important, although difficult, to make that approach and just say, hey, listen, we need to have a conversation about that. There's an anecdote I have around that too, around like, there can also be times where it's like they're trying to be a little too inclusive, right? Like, can't tell you the number of times that I was approached by a Spanish speaking AP and like would love to speak to me in Spanish. And I was like, that's great. I don't speak Spanish. I know that my last name indicates otherwise, but so there's also like there's opportunities, I think, to like educate within the moment and give that feedback in the moment.
I just also want to emphasize Anthony and Karina's point about making noise. It's essential that if you are having this feeling of not being included, you bring that to your leadership and you say, hey, well, for me personally, I had to go to my assistant principal and say, hey, my kids didn't know that a Latinx person could be an English teacher. They thought we were all Spanish teachers. What are we going to do about this? What's your thoughts on this? And once they understand that the problem is in their face and it's having effects on the nurturing and the development of their student, I can't imagine that they wouldn't want to address that. Also, Anthony made a point about inclusivity among teachers translates to inclusivity among students and so on. And I think that is extremely, extremely, extremely true. And also, if there isn't this existing notion of inclusivity among educators, to have that sense of community and inclusivity with your students. There have been, lessons that I have the opportunity to say, hey, this is going to be a Latinx facing lesson. This is what we're going to learn about today. And I know that this is not in line with the unit about Middle Ages, but this is what we are going to learn about today, because it matters and it's not going to be talked about elsewhere. So I think it's important about making noise and getting in where you fit in, being able to include your culture and include all of the things that your students want to see represented and you want to see represented in the world that you live in within your classroom directly.
Thank you for diving into that question from the audience. I know we're a little bit short on time, but I would love to just see, are there any other folks who'd like to come off mute to ask a question or put a question in the chat? That is okay. I'm actually going to encourage our panelists to put their emails in the chat. So if you have any questions directly for our panelists that you might want to not ask full group, feel free to shoot them an email. Andrea and I are going to quickly transition over to closing and next steps. We're not actually going to dive through City Teaching Alliance at this time. We hope you got to actually feel what we value in action. If you would like to learn more, we would love to have those conversations. And so what I want to just share right now quickly is Elise Mignon, who could not be here today. She is also one of our incredible campus recruitment managers. She had this to say about representation. Representation in the classroom matters for a variety of reasons, particularly as student populations become increasingly diverse. Considering that Latinx populations in the US continues to grow, Latinx educators are vital. Students must see themselves in their teachers to feel seen and therefore achieve greatness. And so this is something that we find incredibly pivotal to our work. And I want to invite all of you to continue this conversation. If you've already graduated, scan the QR code here. Andrea would love to have a conversation with you. If you're a senior, if you're thinking about your next steps post-graduation, that's amazing. Elise, who couldn't be here today, would love to get to know you. And if you're an undergraduate student, if you're still a first year, sophomore, junior, scan the QR code to meet with me. I'd love to talk about what you can be doing now on campus and also things you can be doing after graduation to be involved, to prioritize representation. And so we are basically at time. Want to give y'all a sincere thank you for being here. Our next deadline is November 13th, but that's not what this QR code is. We are always trying to make programs that best fit the needs of those in attendance. And so if you can take a moment to scan the QR code, we would love your feedback. That's the way that we continue to improve. And so thank y'all so much. I see that Jay in the chat, Carter asked a question, and I appreciate that we're being able to dive into that into the chat as well. I know we are at time. Thank you for being here today. That concludes our presentation or our event. And so y'all, seriously, have a wonderful night and know that this is just hopefully the beginning. We can't wait to be in touch with you. Please make sure you fill out the survey on your way out. And again, a sincere thank you and gratitude to Anthony, to Karina, and to Jay for sharing their perspective, their experiences, and just their passion for the work they're doing. And so y'all have a great night. That concludes our event.